tears, mass mist, I taste in her goodbye kiss. In the rain, I could not see. Tears rolling down her cheeks. It's been raining here for weeks. Her world was hers alone. So much I didn't know. In the rain, I could not see. Tears rolling down her cheeks. It's been raining here.
In the last unit, we talked about the claims coordinator and the important role they play in managing workers' compensation claims. This week, we're going to talk about an important component of a company's safety management program or workers' compensation management program. That component that is very important is the modified duty program. Let's talk first of all what we mean by modified duty, also called restricted duty or light duty. And I don't have a problem with any of these terms, but some people believe that modified duty is more politically correct. You'll see some folks that think light duty is derogatory. Well, they're just doing light duty, which I don't view that as a derogatory term, but be prepared if you use a term other than modified duty when you're talking about restricted or light duty. You might get some irritated people come back at you. But to me, it's not a big deal. But what we mean by modified duty, restricted duty, or light duty is a work role for an injured worker where the worker's activity is limited by medical restrictions prescribed by a medical professional. Worker gets hurt, they can't do their regular job, but they can still do something, which is a better alternative than the worker being sent home to stay home. We want to avoid sending workers home with an injury if we can. It's not always possible. Some injuries are so severe the worker actually needs to have lost work days, to miss work. They're not able to do anything. They have a temporary disability, a temporary full disability. The types of restrictions that you might see from a medical professional when it comes to prescribing modified duty, lifting restrictions are probably the most common. A worker injures his back or his hip, or maybe it's a shoulder injury. The doctor, in many cases, will prescribe a lifting restriction. They can only lift 15 pounds or 20 pounds or 30 pounds, whatever. A lot of times it's a very low number, a very conservative number. The worker can still work as long as they don't lift more than the limit prescribed by the medical professional. And it's better if that worker can do anything, let's keep them earning their pay. Let's not send them home if that's the only problem. There could be movement restrictions. Maybe they can't climb stairs. Maybe they can't climb a ladder. Maybe they can't. Maybe it would not be good for them to walk on uneven terrain, like you might have on a drilling rig or a drilling location or a construction site. But different kinds of movement. Maybe they can't bend over. Maybe they can't reach overhead. There's no lifting restrictions, but they can't have any overhead movements. but there may be other things they can do. There could be a standing restriction. There are a lot of jobs in the workplace that require the worker to be in a standing position throughout their workday. Maybe their injury does not allow that. They need to, maybe they can stand for 30 minutes and they have to do something else for 30 minutes in a non-standing position. Operating restrictions. Maybe because of medications that they're taking, it's not safe for them to operate heavy equipment or operate industrial equipment in a facility. You've probably heard about the explosion in Pennsylvania that's killed multiple workers at a chocolate factory. And some of you are thinking, a chocolate factory, really? Well, anywhere there are furnaces and boilers and heat, anywhere there's that kind of energy being used, like there would be in a food manufacturing facility, somebody's operating that equipment, somebody's operating that machinery. If a worker is under the influence of a medication, maybe they make a mistake that causes an explosion like we've had just recently in Pennsylvania. And for those of you who may be watching this video in the future, I'm talking about the chocolate factory explosion in March 2023. It probably wasn't due to someone on medication, but that's just an example of what could possibly go wrong if a worker's under the influence of a prescribed medication. Exposure to sunlight. There are some medications, if those medications are prescribed, they make the worker or the person taking the medication more susceptible to sunlight. Someone that normally is not overly susceptible to sunlight, they take certain medications that makes them susceptible. But if that's the only restriction, we'll have them work indoors, out of the sun, or limit their exposure to sunlight. It doesn't have to be. And it goes back to what the doctor says. That's going to determine what they're able to do. If the doctor says no more than 4 hours of sunlight each day, or no more than 2 hours of sunlight each day, you need to find another job for them that they can work for, that they can complete, and they are not exposed to the sunlight. Sitting restrictions for some workers, but maybe it's a back injury or a hip injury. Sitting is very difficult for them, and sitting may actually exacerbate the injury. So there could be sitting restrictions. Now, these first two are the most common that I've seen, but I've seen every one of these. And with injured workers, they get their note from the doctor. They go to the doctor, they get checked out. Doctor makes his diagnosis, and he prescribes restrictions. I've seen all of these. The most common that I've seen are lifting and movement restrictions, with lifting restriction being the most common of all. And there could be others as well, but these are, I would say, the top 6 as far as the types of restrictions you're likely to see. There could also be, again, this is also up there pretty high. There's hours per day restrictions. Maybe they can do their normal job, but they can't do more than 6 hours a day. In a lot of industries, an 8-hour day is a luxury. In a lot of industries, a norm is 10 to 12 hours a day. So the restriction could even be 8 hours per day. If they're on a construction project and they normally work 12 hours a day, maybe you have to send them home after 8 hours because of their prescribed restriction. Or if it's a job where they would normally work an 8-hour shift, maybe they can only do 4 to 6 hours. Then they would leave early for the day, get back home, recuperate. All of this is better than the worker going home and doing nothing and receiving workers' compensation benefits. And that's not the only reason. It's not just about workers' comp and savings on workers' comp. It's about there's some other benefits to the worker also that we'll talk about. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. The main goal is that any work they're able to do does not cause additional injury or delay healing. We don't want anything that would exacerbate, make worse their injury. Keeping the injured worker active, though, being productive, is good for them and good for the employer. in a number of ways, and I'll talk more about those benefits shortly. Right here they are. Benefits of the modified duty program. Benefits to the worker first. They're able to maintain their income at pre-injury levels. If they go home, they're only going to get 70% of their pre-injury pay. By working in a modified duty program or under modified duty restrictions, they do have the capacity to maintain their income at pre-injury levels. Now, employers do have the option of reducing their pay. If maybe their normal job, they make $35 an hour. They've been assigned to a modified duty job, and the people that normally work in that position only make $15 an hour. Employers can do that. They can lower the wages for the injured worker. But in my experience, that's not normally what happens. Another benefit to the worker, they get back to full duty faster. They stay in the routine, which helps them get back to full duty faster. Maintaining that normal work routine. Let's say a worker gets injured and he goes home for 2 weeks, you may lose that worker because it may not be easy for that worker to get back into the flow of the normal work routine after a 2-week layoff or a 6-week layoff or whatever it is. But if you can keep them in the workplace doing something, that helps maintain that normal work routine. They're still getting up, they're still going to work at a certain time, they're still going home at a certain time in most cases, unless there's an work hours restriction. But the work hours restriction, though it does happen, it's not as common as the other 6 that we looked at on the previous slide. Maintains the workers' self-esteem because they are still contributing to their company. Most workers do not want to miss work because of an injury. Most workers are loyal and dedicated to their employer. They take pride in their work, and if they're injured and they're sitting at home, that can affect them. That can affect them psychologically. It can lower their morale. They just sitting around all day doing nothing. They start to feel like crap, like they're worthless. But if we can give them something else to do, so they're still contributing to the company, that's going to help keep their morale up, keep them more psychologically healthy. I know we're getting over into the realm of worker psychology here, but that is an important realm. A lot of employers overlook it. But if we have a psychologically sick person, that is a problem. And I'm not talking about mental illness. I'm talking about schizophrenia or paranoia or anything like that. I'm talking about they're just not, they're depressed, or they have some other minor psychological disorder. That's not good for the worker or good for the employer. So these are a few of the benefits for the worker. Here are benefits to the employer if they have a functioning modified duty program. Lowers workers' compensation costs. If the workers' compensation claim is medical only, that will help to lower the experience modification rating. The most expensive or the most harmful types of claims as far as having an adverse effect on the EMR are those claims where you have medical costs and indemnity costs. Remember, indemnity costs, those are the payments for the lost wages. Indemnity payments and workers' comp are payments for lost wages. So by keeping the worker on the payroll and doing something to contribute, it's going to lower compensation costs. It's going to have a positive effect on the experience modification rating. You're still getting some productivity out of the worker. You're not completely losing all of the productivity. It may not be the same type of productivity, but you're still getting something out of the worker that's contributing to the organization. And we hire people because we need people to do a job, to be productive. If a worker's sick, he or she goes home and stays home, we're not getting any productivity. Now, some of you are thinking, well, we can hire someone to replace them. Well, a replacement worker is not going to, generally speaking, going to be as productive. There's going to be a learning curve for that replacement worker. You've got to get them trained. You got to get them used to the job. You got to get them used to the work environment. And their productivity is going to, their productivity as far as general productivity and contribution to the company may be less than the productivity of an experienced worker on a modified duty program. If workers are active in the company, if they are working under restrictions, if they're in the workplace, the employer can kind of monitor what they're doing and make sure that they're not overdoing it. If you send somebody home with a back injury, they may decide to go fishing. They may decide, well, it's deer season, I'm going to climb up in my deer stand, and they injure themselves doing things around the house or recreationally that interferes, delays their healing. And a lot of times that's the worker's not going to disclose that to the employer or to the workers' comp doctors. They're not going to say, hey, I slipped climbing up into my deer stand and I've retweaked my back. They're not going to tell us that or tell the doctors that. So having them in the company doing something, maybe it's an office job, maybe it's whatever, we can monitor them and make sure that they are following their restrictions. Workers abusing workers' comp fraudulently, workers' comp fraud from the worker standpoint is relatively rare, but having a modified duty program would send the message to some workers that getting an injury is not going to get them a paid vacation. If workers understand that the company has a strong modified duty program and they know that if they get hurt, then there's probably still going to be working in most cases, that might help alleviate any potential workers' comp fraud. Again, and I do want to emphasize here, I've said this a couple of times throughout the semester, and the reason I keep mentioning this is because there's so many people out there in the world think that everybody's on workers' comp is a freeloader. They're just no good, looking for a paid vacation. They're just lazy. That's why they're on workers' comp. Well, that would be 1% of workers' comp. At most, 5% of workers' comp cases would fall into that category. Most workers who are on workers' comp, who have an injury, they're honest, they're hard workers, they want to do their job, and they want to contribute to their company that they're working for. But again, for that small percentage out there, it may help alleviate workers' comp abuse. One of the important things that a company needs to do when they're implementing their modified duty program is making sure to get the medical providers on the same page, on board. We need to identify providers. And when I say medical providers, I'm talking about doctors, clinics, nurses, physician's assistants, whoever's going to be initially treating injured workers. I've used Concentra a lot over the years. Some people like Concentra, some people don't. I think they've got locations all over the United States. I think some locations are better than others. But I always had pretty good luck with Concentra. And I could work with Concentra. They understood that my goal was to get the worker back to work as soon as possible. They knew the modified duty program that the company had, and they tried to work with us to help us achieve our goals of getting those workers back to work. We need to educate and persuade providers in some cases, and I'm going to talk more about that as we go along. One thing that safety professionals, and I'd say most people need to understand, when you go to the doctor, that doctor is working for you. If I send an injured employee to a clinic, that clinic is working for my company. They are working for the patient. They are working for other people. They are there to provide a service. And when you come at it from that perspective, you realize you do have some influence on how medical providers will respond to a workplace injury. Now, if you go in, like some people might have this view of doctors as being godlike and all-knowing and the final authority, and we're lucky to have them help us. If you go in with that attitude, then you're probably not going to be able to persuade them to get on board with your program. But they're not that. They are just people doing a job, and they work for us. We pay their salaries, and we do have some authority and power over the types of treatment. Now, at the end of the day, it's up to the doctors if it's medical, but we can influence them to prescribe restrictions rather than prescribing days at home. And that's what we want to do with our medical providers. We want to get them to the point that their first inclination will be to provide restrictions and not send the worker home for lost work days. But there are some doctors out there that are afraid of malpractice lawsuits. And they're afraid that, well, if they give the worker restrictions, the worker's not going to follow the restrictions. They're going to hurt themselves worse. The injuries are going to be exacerbated, and they may end up in a lawsuit. So they're overly conservative in their prescriptions when it comes to what a worker needs to do after they're injured. But we need to meet those doctors and avoid those doctors that don't understand modified duty and are overly fearful of malpractice lawsuits. Generally, we want to avoid medical professionals who are uncooperative when it comes to our modified duty program. We want providers who understand it, understand our goal, understand that we're not just in it to reduce costs, we're in it for the good of the worker. You might go through that. Hey, here are the benefits for our workers. Get them back to work, keep them productive, keep their morale up, maintain their wages at pre-injury levels. Go in with that approach. You're going to have a better chance of getting them on board. And I'm talking about a lot of things now that I want to be talking about in more detail as we move along. Here are some tips for working with medical providers. Again, we want medical providers that will work with us and avoid those who are hard to work with, who are not willing to listen to and try to help us achieve our goals. We want to inform them about our modified duty program. We want them to understand our commitment to get the workers back to work. We will need to explain our modified duty plan to them and explain how the company is going to be involved, how we expect the medical community, the medical providers to be involved in achieving our goals. Doing this will help us gain the cooperation from those medical providers. One of the, I brag a lot about Kiewit, even though it wasn't a perfect company. I do brag a lot about Kiewit, and I'll talk a little bit about their procedures when it came to starting a new construction project. Several weeks before a construction project was scheduled to begin, safety managers would go into that community and interview medical providers. We would go out into this new community, we would talk to the medical providers in that community, and we would identify in advance. You don't wait until the worker gets injured, it's too late. Companies need to do this up front before there's an injury. But we would go into these communities. Winter Park, Colorado, and that job up there is one that comes to mind. Before we were ready to start that job, went into the Winter Park community. And actually, there weren't a lot of doctors in Winters Park. Winter Park. We had to go outside the community, but we talked to doctors, shared with them our goals of for getting injured workers back to work, and we, in essence, shopped around. We interviewed these doctors, shopped around until we found the medical provider that was on board with our goals of keeping workers on the job. But again, when you're making this proposal to these medical providers, they also need to understand that if it's a serious injury, that you understand the need for time away from work. But we're talking about injuries that aren't that serious. Even injuries that aren't that serious, some doctors automatically will write in their prescription, stay at home for 3 days. You can return to work, a week from now or something like that. That's what we want to avoid. That's why we need to get out in the communities and meet the medical providers and find the right medical provider that understands what we're trying to do with modified duty. Again, in the construction industry or mobile industries, this is a lot more difficult. You have to do this every time you move into a new community, into a new area, new construction site. But if it's a operation that does not move, is not mobile, if it's a factory, if it's a steel yard, something that is not mobile, then you may only have to do this once. And when you go to work as a safety professional for whatever company, let's say you go to work for Dow Tile in Muskogee, well, they've already got this set up. They already have done this for you. Where you might be involved in doing this, again, would be if you go to work for those companies in mobile industries, oil and gas, construction, agriculture, where there's a lot of moving around. I'm going to go ahead and stop now. I'm kind of in the middle of a main point here, but we're 30 minutes in. I'm going to stop now. We'll come back in the next video and continue our discussion.